Welcome to the Communication 24/7 podcast, where we communicate about how we communicate. I'm your host, Jennifer Furlong. Well, I feel like I want to introduce this episode as welcome to the Jen and Jem show because I'm Jen Furlong and I have my guest here, which is Jem Fuller. And so I'm super excited about having my next guest on the show. This is a much different topic. We're able to focus in on a very specific aspect of communication, which I don't get the opportunity to do very often. I've had a lot of wonderful guests on this show. And of course, it's always centered on the area of communication. But today I want to focus in specifically on men and communication. And so my next guest, he is the author of the book, The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. So I am eager to do a deep dive into your thought process. What made you want to write this book? What are some interesting finds that you discovered while writing this book? Jem, thank you for being on the show and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Jen. And it's nice seeing your name because autocorrect corrects my name to be your name. So much of my typed communication coming to me through text messages or emails, people refer to me as Jen. So there you go.
Oh. I'll do my best not to make that mistake. Yes.
I don't. I really don't mind. I don't mind. Yeah. Thanks for having me on your show. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun conversation. And I think it's going to be a very meaningful conversation, which is, of course, the most important thing. So, for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work or your background, do you mind just introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. So starting from the present moment and working backwards, I guess, I currently work as a leadership coach and I help leaders create healthier cultures in their workplaces. That's the bread and butter work that I do. But my partner and I also run self-discovery retreats in the Himalayan mountains in India and Bali and here in Australia. We love that part of our work. We've got I was about to say four teenagers, but we've got a 20-year-old, 18, 17 and 15-year-old. So we have a busy household. We live down here on part of the southern coast of Australia in a little surf town. So lots of nature, surfing, hiking, that sort of thing. And then the background goes, I've been running my own coaching consultancy for 12 years now. And prior to that, was working as a senior leader in a multinational travel company. But prior to that was very colorful all around the world, doing everything from kindergarten teaching in Taiwan to fire dancing and tattooing, a motorcycle courier, volunteer in third world countries, a laborer, a corporate leader, so many different things. I still kind of scratch my head as to how I fit it all in. But it really was me pursuing my passion to immerse myself into foreign culture. So I spent the best part of a decade traveling around the world and really, I just had this insatiable thirst to try and get into cultures that were so different to where I grew up in Australia, in terms of the language and the food and the religion or the spirituality or, just the whole thing. And that was fascinating for me. And now I'm in my 50s now and the work that I do is really around cross-cultural connection and
Mhm.
hence the communication piece. And I look back now and it all makes sense. It all kind of fits together and I understand why I spent so many years in foreign lands.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that varied background. And I think one of the things that the through line in all of those experiences, which by the way, when I was reading your bio, I was like, this is really cool. I mean, hello, fire dancer, traditional tattooist, kindergarten teacher. What's going
Yeah.
on here?
Yeah.
But I think for those of us who genuinely enjoy this thing we call communication and just reaching out and getting different perspectives and just learning from others, like every experience that you have, I'm sure you're able to draw from that experience and then build onto that experience all the way up to what you're doing today with coaching and working with organizations and I'm sure individuals, helping them build their communication skills as well. I'm curious, what are some of those things, those qualities that you think you were able to take from those less common experience, like the fire dancing. What what are some of those qualities in that particular experience? I'm sure you're able to draw from some things that you can think back on now and be able to make those connections of, "Wow, that is something that I experienced as a fire dancer, and it's absolutely applicable to being a good communicator these days," reaching out and being able to have an authentic conversation with someone.
Yeah, look, I think to use that example of fire dancing, no matter where I was throwing fire around, whether I was fire dancing in Asia or Europe or Australia or wherever I was doing it, people loved it.
Yeah.
And so we have these common we have these commonalities, us
Mm,
humans, you know. You don't have to peel back the layers too far to realize that we have things in common. And this translates directly to communication. The root of the word communication comes from the Latin communicatio, which means a sharing, and the verb communicare, which means to make common. So
mhm,
communication is to make something commonly understood. What do we have in common? How can we come to an understanding of each other? That's what communication is. And so, especially when communication is tricky or being tested in some way because there are two different people or groups of people that have different ideas about something, the best place to start is what do we have in common? Let's
mm,
start with what we've got in common, you know, and then we can explore. Once we've created that connection over something in common, then we can explore the diversity of our different ideas or our different backgrounds or our different ways we think the company should move forward, you know. But I think that's the through thread is that, you know, we've got so much in common, us people. And quite often, when people are shouting at each other across those digital divides of difference on social media, you know,
mhm,
and whether someone ideologically is different, so you might have pro life or pro choice or pro vax or anti vax, or you might have a different religious idea or political idea. These people are shouting at each other. There's a lot of fear
mhm.
that they have this fear of difference. So that person over there is different to me. I don't even know that person. We haven't even sat down and broken bread together.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I fear them, so I'm going to try and so I react aggressively. That's what people do. And I think to you know, I remember this story, Jen, when I was back in the 90s, I was backpacking through Pakistan, 1998 actually it was, and I was up in the remote northwestern regions of Pakistan, up in the northwestern frontier province. And it was actually just after, I don't know if your listeners remember this, but back in 1998, we think it was Osama bin Laden sent cruise missiles or bombed an US embassy in Africa,
Mhm.
right? And then claimed it. And that was the start of the unrest between them and the US. And then the US sent cruise missiles into Pakistan to try and kill Osama bin Laden. They didn't get him, but they did kill locals. Anyway, that's when jihad was declared. I was
Mhm.
sitting on a bus in remote North Pakistan, a local bus. I was the only foreigner on the bus. And I was sitting next to a young Pakistani university student. And he had the newspaper with me and he was translating the newspaper into English for me. And he was saying, jihad has been declared. This was in 1998, yeah, so a couple of
Wow.
years before 9/11.
Right.
Anyway, I had a wonderful conversation with this young man because we were talking about, he spoke English because he was a university student. And we were talking about how neither of us were invested in our corresponding countries' political parties. We didn't agree with, he didn't agree with, you know, the extremist Islamic State. He
Mhm.
was quite a modest, mild Pakistani boy who just grew up in a town and was going to university. And I was apolitical. I was outside. I was anti-establishment actually at the time. I was outside of the whole thing. And we were having this conversation, and he said to me, he said, Jem, if I cut your skin here and I cut my skin here, we have the same color blood.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, he said, despite the color of our skin, we have the same color blood. And he looked at me in the eyes beautifully and he said, you and me, we are the same, he said,
Mhm.
you know. And it was just such a poignant moment that I remember. And it was beautiful. I felt deeply connected to this person who had grown up in a completely different environment to me,
Yeah.
surrounded by completely different ideas around life and death and what it all means. But we only had to peel back the layer that much to realize that we actually share a lot in common. And we all need food and water. We all need shelter. We all care about our children. We all grieve when a loved one dies. All of us, And anyway, so I'm a bit of a hippie at heart, and I think that if we can improve our communication and our ability to connect and understand each other, the world would become a better place.
Yeah, I love that story, and your reference to starting with what we have in common is so incredibly important. In communication, I think a lot of the times when we are communicating with someone, we're perceiving to be different from ourselves, and I use the
Mm,
word perceiving because we already have all of these notions of what we think about that person based on the very little bit of information that we have on them. And so if we do take the opportunity to have a conversation, dig a little deeper. Yes, we're not going to agree on everything. That's impossible. Even
yeah.
people you grow up with, friends, family, even people who are ideologically the same as you, you're going to have differences of opinion on various topics. So if you have that desire and willingness to just have that conversation and listen, that does not mean you have to agree with them, by the way. It just means, listen to try to understand their perspective. And even after that, you may not still understand their perspective, but at least it's a start to that conversation. So many of us are afraid to do that or just unwilling to do
Mm.
that. In all of the conversations that you've had with so many different people from across the world, so many different cultures that you've been able to just interact with, do you find that that is something unique to us in the United States or, in Australia, or do you think this is something that's worldwide? Have you viewed a difference in how people are willing to accept a different point of view or at least being willing to listen to a different point of view?
Look, I'm sure there are cultural trends which I
Mhm.
haven't studied
Yeah.
through data, but I do know that humans, this is another thing we have in common. We all have a sense of identity. We all have a sense of who I think
Mhm.
I am.
That's right.
All of us.
Mhm.
And whether it doesn't matter whether you're in China or Africa or Asia or the US or Australia, we
Mm.
all have a sense of being an individual
Mhm.
entity. And what happens is that when our ideas are challenged, we've very literally we've assimilated our ideas, especially our ideological or political or religious beliefs. We've assimilated them as a part of our sense of identity.
That's right. Mhm.
And we get very, very our ego, our sense of identity gets very, very defensive when it's challenged because to the ego, if the ego is challenged, it's akin to real life and death. The ego believes that it's actually in danger of death
Mhm.
when it's not.
Mhm.
You can have a death of ego, you can have an identity crisis. I'm speaking firsthand here because I've
Mhm.
had them. You can have an identity crisis and you still live. You still wake up breathing. In fact, it's an opportunity to re-identify, to upgrade the software, so to speak,
Mhm.
and develop hopefully an improved version of who you think you are.
Mhm.
But anyway, to the ego, it's real life and death. So when someone challenges your ideas or your beliefs, that's why we get super defensive.
Yeah.
When you're defensive, you're not listening. You're not able to listen. You're not seeking to understand the other person's point of view because you're too busy trying to defend yours.
Right.
And so I think part of the practice of better communication, more conscious communication, is the practice of realizing that you can just loosen your grip a little bit on how you think things should be.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
just relax your grip a little bit because maybe there might be other ways. And like you said, Jen, when you really come to a place of curiosity as to where the other person's coming from
Mhm.
and you really lean in and seek to understand, that doesn't mean that you have to agree with them at the end of it.
Mhm.
And you might not completely understand them either.
Yeah.
But the practice of seeking to understand means that you're loosening your grip a little bit on how you think things should be and who you think you are, right? And I think that's a healthy thing to do because then we can expand our consciousness. Then we can be open to learning and growth and re identification. And the world, like your experience in the world becomes easier. It just does.
Yeah.
So I think, the practice of more conscious communication, which is being more aware of the communication itself and less defensive, is actually quite a spiritual practice. For insert here whatever word works for you. If you're not a spiritual person, call it whatever you want to call it. But for me, it's quite a spiritual practice.
Got a burning question about communication, or do you want to hear more about a specific topic? Well, send it our way. Email us at info@communication247.com, and you just might hear your question on a future episode of Communication 24/7. Let's communicate about how we communicate. Yeah, I think one of the things that makes it easy for individuals to keep up that wall when we're communicating with someone that we perceive to be different from ourselves is it makes it easier. If I don't know that much about you, it makes it easier for me to be able to pretend that you must be my enemy in some way, or you're so different from me that there's just no way we're going to have something in common. One of the things that I've learned through my experiences as a communicator, I've held a lot of different positions within the communication field, and some of them within, it touches on politics, as a media analyst, and speaking to other media analysts when you're reading the news and talking about having some really difficult conversations about tough topics. When you have those conversations and you try to seek to understand where the other person is coming from, you begin to, again, not agree with them because, you're so politically misaligned that you're not gonna agree with them, but to be able to just understand, "Okay, I don't agree with you, but I get that point that you made right there.
Mm,
I understand that one point that you just made, and I learned something new about this situation or that organization, or I learned something new about you as a person." You're becoming more human at that point. You're
yeah,
becoming more connected at that point, and it makes it much more difficult to view that person as an enemy, to view that person as someone who is just so at odds with you that there's absolutely no way ever have anything in common with them. And so
mm,
I try to encourage people, have those conversations and to be open with those conversations and understand, no, you do not have to reach an agreement, but just maybe you might see them as a human being a little bit more, and it might make
yeah,
it easier to even have more conversations down the road. Yeah, so I'm just so excited to hear someone else be able to express to my listeners that it how important it is to just be open to those
yeah,
different perceptions. And
yeah.
yeah, it's not gonna be an end to your ego, I promise you.
No, 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 no. Our ego will always be with us. That's
Yes.
completely fine. But by developing an expanded awareness of our ego, and when our ego is driving the bus, just to
Oh,
be
yeah.
more aware of that means that the ego is less able to,
Yeah.
drive the runaway bus.
Yeah.
And our ego is necessarily defensive and reactive. So in a
Yeah.
situation even when you're sitting on your own and you're scrolling through social media, and the algorithms put some clickbait in front of you, something to enrage you or upset you or make you go, no, the
It's
part of you
designed.
that
Yeah.
reacts immediately and just goes, no, that's so wrong.
Yeah.
That's your ego.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
your sense of identity getting super defensive, and just notice it, just call it out and go, oh,
Yeah.
wow, look at you jumping straight in there, ego, to defend. And how about if we pause and take a breath
Yes.
and literally loosen your grip a little bit and consider alternative perspectives. Just consider them. I'm not saying you have to go and change your religion or change your spiritual beliefs, or maybe they expand a little bit your ways of seeing things. But just the practice of pausing and considering alternative perspectives, that's a healthy practice in itself. This is a practice of open-mindedness.
Yeah.
So the next time you're scrolling and you see something that makes you go, no, or something that makes you go, yes, something that makes you react strongly immediately,
Yeah.
pause, put the phone down, take a breath, notice yourself, and then just consider alternative perspectives. I know that sounds very simple, but I think it's a really healthy practice.
Oh, it's such an important practice. I say respond, don't react. And I think
Yes.
it's very similar to what you're saying is hit that pause button and acknowledge how it's making you feel.
Yep.
Think about how your emotions are impacting not only your ability to receive that message, but now it's impacting how are you going to send out a message? What is going to immediately follow with your emotions? And I
Yep.
think at the same time, if you're having a conversation with someone else, and let's say it's not social media you're reacting to, but it's someone else, you're having a conversation, they say something that triggers you. You get that
Mm.
emotional response. That's the time to hit that pause button, acknowledge how this is making me feel a certain kind of way. So how is this
Mhm.
impacting my ability to take this message in and it's impacting how I'm about to say something, but also acknowledge how that other person's emotions are
Mm.
potentially impacting how they are communicating with you. And I think that certain awareness can go a long way. And, and going back to the ego thing, I think not taking yourself so seriously all the
Yeah.
time can go a
Yeah.
long way.
A
Yeah.
long, long, long way.
A long way. I have a friend who lives in Philadelphia, and I went up there in the fall, and so I'm conservative and she's more liberal. So we're on the opposite ends of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
We have great conversations, and so when I visited her in the fall, I went to her apartment and she just kind of smiled at me. She was like, "Let me take you to my office. I wanna show you some things I just hung up on the wall." I'm like, "Oh, here we go." So we
Yeah.
go in
Yeah.
there, and she has these huge posters of Barack Obama hanging up
Right.
all over
Right.
her walls, and I
Right.
just started laughing, and she was like, "I knew you'd appreciate this." I was like, "That's
Yeah.
awesome. They're incredible posters."
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that I like to share that story because I think it's just an example of regardless of your beliefs, your values, when you give someone else an opportunity to be able to build a relationship with you and have conversations and not allow your ego to be in the driver's seat like you were just describing,
Mm.
you can have such a fulfilling relationship with that person to be able to have conversations, and even if they push back on you, it is only going to enrich you even
Yeah.
further by being able to have
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I love that what you just said, Jen, about, not taking yourself so seriously.
Yeah.
It's a key to a happier life.
It
You
really
know,
is.
if I meet someone and I ask them how they are and they say, "Oh, life's pretty heavy, man. It's all pretty full on." And so I guarantee somewhere in the mix they're taking themselves way too seriously.
Yeah.
And the ability to just remember, I mean, I even still love doing this, right? On
Mhm.
a clear night, go outside, look up at the Milky Way in the sky, and remember that we're standing on a tiny little speck that is orbiting around a star. And we're out on the edge of the Milky Way, and the Milky Way is a disc shaped galaxy. And we're out on the edge of the Milky Way and looking through the Milky Way to remember that to cross from our side of the Milky Way to the other side, traveling at the speed of light, which is 300,000 kilometers. I don't know what that is in miles, but 300,000 kilometers a second. All right. Every second you're moving 300,000 kilometers, traveling that fast, it would still take 120,000 years just to get to the other side of the Milky Way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Milky Way is one of not millions of galaxies that we know of, it's one of billions of galaxies that we know of, right? So the whole thing is massive, massive. And here am I standing down here on little planet Earth getting all upset because I was stuck in a traffic jam or
Right.
something, or
Yes.
because somebody called me a name or
Yeah.
somebody, offended me or something, and I'm getting all serious about it. It's like, oh my lord, people, can we lighten up a little bit, please?
1,000%, yes. I am a speck.
Yeah, right. And in a second, I'm not going to be here anymore.
That's
And
right.
in 2 generations, I won't even be remembered. My grandkids' kids aren't even going to know who I was. And
Mhm.
so why am I taking myself so seriously?
Yeah.
And I think that when we lighten up about how important we are as an individual, when we lighten up a little bit and we can laugh at ourselves a little bit, I think that then we're actually even more effective in our mission or our purpose or our service. So if you're somebody who cares about acts of service and somehow doing good, if you're somebody who's driven to somehow have a positive impact, whether it's just locally as a member of your family, or whether it's more broadly, whether you want to get out into community and somehow do good work, I think you're more effective in that good work if you lighten up a little bit and don't take yourself so seriously.
Yeah, yeah, and you're more apt to be successful in gathering others to your cause. You're gonna be
Yes.
more successful in getting supporters,
Yeah.
even people who disagree with you.
Yeah, you're more attractive.
Yeah,
When you're a bit lighter, you're certainly more attractive, and I think also when you lighten up a little bit, because if you imagine this metaphor we were talking before about holding on too tightly,
yeah,
so if you're holding on very tightly to the way you think things are, or to the path, the journey that you're on to try and be successful in business, say you want to be successful in your career, or you want to be successful as an entrepreneur, and you're holding on very tightly to the way you think that should go, when the storms come, and they come, when the challenges come, and they do come, you are more likely to capsize and get swallowed by the seas of the storm if you're holding on too tightly. You need to loosen your grip a little bit and go with the flow, so to speak. You need to be able to, if the winds change direction, you need to be able to harness that change in direction. You need to be able to pivot, as everyone was saying during the pandemic. But you do need to be flexible and adaptable, and to do that, you need to loosen your grip a little bit, and lighten up a little bit. And so then I think you can harness flow state more easily. And when you're in flow state, you do your best work, you attract the best people, you get the best successes in life. So it's a real metaphor for living not only a good life and a happier life, but a more successful life, I think.
yeah, that's a fantastic metaphor. I live on the coast of Georgia, in Savannah, Georgia, and
Hmm.
one of the things that you'll see on the beach posted everywhere, just be mindful of the tide. When the tide when,
Yeah.
the tide comes and goes, and we have rip tides, and
Yeah.
you have to be willing. Everyone, all the locals know, if you get stuck in that rip tide, you're just gonna have to be willing to go with, as scary as it is, go with that flow, and just
Mm,
it'll take you downstream. It will.
mm,
Just
mm.
just go with it, and
Yeah.
you will end up
Absolutely.
downstream somewhere. But if you fight against it, you're gonna consistently fight, you're gonna wear yourself out, and then that's where people end up drowning because they
Yes.
just can't fight. It's not something that you're going to be able to win that fight.
No.
Yeah, I
No, that's
love that
right.
metaphor. And I think these are all concepts, you and I have been having a conversation about that are universal. I think
Mm.
regardless of your background, regardless of your gender, regardless of your experiences, I think many of us, many of the listeners can relate to what we're talking about. So I'm curious, with the book that you wrote, it looks like you wanted it to specifically either speak to men or speak about men, at least. What made you want to take that particular focus?
It was actually an idea that was given to me. I started writing the book generally for
Mm,
everyone, The
yeah.
Art of Conscious Communication. And the reason I started writing the book about communication, as this is what you and I have in common, is that I believe that communication is at the bedrock of our ability to be successful or to live a good life in every aspect of what we do, not only in our relationships, but in our ability to be able to manifest an idea into reality. If you can't communicate the idea, that's just not going to happen. To cross those divides of difference, to harness the power of diversity, to for us, it's fundamental for humanity is communication. And so I started writing a book generally about communication, and then I engaged a book writing mentor, and she said to me, Jem, you need to pick an audience, you need to pick a niche
Mhm.
to write for, because it's too broad. And she suggested it. She said, do you know, I think men could really do with some help around communication. And I thought, yeah, I think generally speaking, I think you're right. So I started writing the book for men. I mean, I wrote the book for men. And it's interesting because it's mainly women that buy self development books, not men.
Huh?
And I get a lot of emails from women saying, thank you so much for writing the book. I got so much from it. And now I just need to try and get my husband or my sons or my brother
Mm,
to read it,
yeah.
which they're doing. So that's interesting. But I mean, look, I am quite passionate about Men, and I'm generalizing, not
Mhm.
every man, but
Right.
men in general, and specifically in our cultures, the US and Australia. But I am passionate about men upgrading their ability to be able to communicate because I think it's tied into things like violence, our inability to be able to be aware of our emotional feeling state and then communicate and express that as we're going along rather than it being pent up and then exploding in anger. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't know whether it's 95 or 97% of the world's violence is perpetrated by males,
Mhm.
and not only against women, but also men against men. So there's just, and I'm a pacifist. I don't think that violence is, I mean, I understand when there's controlled violence in terms of boxing, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about uncontrolled violence in the home and in the street. I just think it's so sad and unnecessary, and I wish it wasn't happening. And I think a lot of it to do with men is that they don't know how to communicate.
Mhm.
So there's that side of things, but then also even, I like the old patriarchal structures that we operate within, not only in the corporate world, but in our government structures and in our societal structures. It's a patriarchal structure, which is a structure of dominance. So for me to be successful in a corporate career, I have to climb the ladder. I have to beat the person next to me to get that, to get that promotion. So it's a competitive climbing on top of each other to survive and to win system. And
Mhm.
I think that system is becoming antiquated. And I think that we need to upgrade it. And I think we should be having a more feminine style structure, which is about us together. Like, let's raise the tide together.
Mhm.
Let's be more human centric, more about we rather than about me.
Mhm.
And so I think that these are the changes that humanity would benefit from. And they to do that, we have to be better at communicating. We
Mhm.
really do. And so yeah, so I wrote the book for men, and and I know it's helping. I'm getting some really lovely feedback over the last couple of years of how easy it is to read and how immediately applicable the practices are. At the end of every chapter, there's a practice, and people are loving it. And very, very luckily, I published it in Australia, and I got picked up in the US by an agent, Gray and Miller agency in the States, and they got me a book deal, which this year with Mango Publishing in Miami, Florida, and we've done the re-edit. We're doing the second edition. They're rebranding it and doing narrating the audio book, and that's set to be released in August, I
Oh,
believe.
okay.
And so I've signed a deal with Mango Publishing in the States, which is as a young budding author. When I say young,
Mhm.
I mean young author. As a young budding author, it's pretty exciting to have a publishing house pick you up and say, "We'll publish your books." So there's that one which is coming out in August, and the book that I'm writing at the moment is called "How to Have That Conversation." And it's
Ah,
about the conversation, the one that you kind of you don't want to have, but you want to have, but you think it should be good to have, and that you're scared to have because you don't want to upset the other person. But if you do have that conversation and it goes well, it'll liberate you from this burden you've been carrying. But we kick the can down the road, right? It's like, oh,
right.
I don't know how to
Yes.
have that conversation. And so the book is how to have that conversation. That's what's being written at the moment.
If you've read my book, Cracking the Rich Code, you know it is chock full of fantastic advice from top thought leaders and super successful entrepreneurs from around the world. How would you like to be a member of an exclusive community that provides that same how to content from those same leaders? What if you were able to attend member only live events and interact with them? I'd like to invite you to join the Rich Code Club. It will change the way you think about yourself, your money, and your life. It's the only social media platform purely focused on helping you grow. Join the Rich Code Club today for free by clicking on the link in the show notes. Hey, are you liking what you're hearing on the Communication 24/7 podcast? Well, do me a favor and go ahead and follow us and leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us keep the conversation going strong. Oh, both books. So needed. Absolutely needed. I think everyone is just so hungry for that. And I'm so glad that your book that's geared toward men has been picked up and it's being published and redone, within the United States because I pulled it back up because I knew we were having this conversation, and it was just last month. It was the American Academy of Medical Colleges. They were talking about men's mental health. And the very first sentence in the article was men in the United States die by a suicide at a rate 4 times higher than women. And yet men are diagnosed with depression and mood disorders at far lower rates. And then the
Mm.
question was, why is this? And I think that's such an important question, and I think it ties directly into something that you said regarding men's communication and within our societies, and I know, especially within the United States, we do have this expectation that if you're a man, suck it up,
Mhm.
like, life
100%.
sucks, right? Life sucks,
Yep.
shit happens,
Man
get over it,
man
and
up,
just continue to
toughen up.
march.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we even tell our boys, "Don't cry like a girl." Well,
Yes. Oh,
what a
anything,
ridiculous thing
quote,
to
"like a
say.
girl" rubs me the wrong way.
Oh, what a ridiculous thing to say. And you're right. And because we have created these generations of men who believe that to be a man, you have to be you can't be vulnerable. Vulnerability is a weakness, right? So that's why men are not being diagnosed with depression because they're suffering alone in silence because they
Mhm.
don't think that they can tell anyone about it because that's vulnerability and that's weak. And then I'm not a real man. And so I may as well just get to the point where I take my life.
Yeah.
It's really sad. And to communicate to communicate consciously and authentically, there has to be some vulnerability because you have to be vulnerable and say, "I'm I'm not great right now," or "I'm not feeling. I don't know how I'm feeling about this," or "I don't understand you," or "I don't have this. I don't have my shit together."
Mhm. Yeah.
You need to be able to be okay with vulnerability to communicate more effectively, and that's where men struggle with it. I think.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating about that in this, in society's idea of what it is to be a man and, and to just kind of man up and suck it up. I'm a veteran, and so I've had an opportunity to speak with so many veterans who have served in the military and in all the different branches. I served in the Marine Corps, and I have friends and family who served in so many of the different branches, where whether it was Air Force or Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Marine Corps. One of the interesting things that I have found in my conversations is the statistics are just out of the roof when you look at the servicemen and women who come home, the rates of depression, the rates of thoughts of suicide, PTSD, all of those things. And one of the things that so many veterans will repeat is when they get out of the military, it can be such a lonely place.
Mm,
Like, all of a sudden, you're not surrounded by your brothers and sisters who you were able to have those conversations with, especially ones who you went overseas, you were deployed, you went through war together, you experienced some true hardships together, but you were together and they were able to be vulnerable. They were able to cry in front of each other and hold each other and tell each other, look, we're going to get through this, and have that sense of emotional support, that support
mm,
system. And then all of a sudden, when you get out of the military, you're surrounded. Yeah, you may have family, you may have friends, but you're not able to just really have those conversations with someone who truly understands what it is that you went through. And I have not read any studies on this, but my theory is I think
mm,
it ties back to exactly what you were talking about is not being able to have those conversations to communicate in an authentic way. What am I going through? What am I feeling? How do I feel short? How do I all of these emotions that I'm going through, I don't know how to express them, and I know that you're not gonna understand what it is that I'm trying to say. I think there's something there in that,
mm, mm,
and to be in a society that says or believes to be a man, you have to just suck it up and not complain about it, but then knowing so many people who have served, in the military and have gone through some true horrific hardships.
Mm,
to know that the one thing that did help them survive that, get through that with one another was their ability to have people with them. They could communicate in that way. I just find it just
mm.
just be a fascinating juxtaposition of
Yeah,
expectations versus reality.
yeah, yeah. Yes, everything you said, I agree wholeheartedly with. And, someone very close to me, a man very close to me, who's been suffering chronic
Mhm,
depression and has been suicidal and chronic anxiety, but has been keeping it to himself apart from his wife and close friends. But he's been keeping it to himself because of the stigma attached to mental health, and he
mhm.
feels like a failure
Yeah.
because of his struggles. Anyway, he's been suicidal for quite some time, and he finally agreed to going into hospital. And he's in hospital. He's in a mental hospital, and he's having electric shock treatment.
Mm,
And he was so fearful of going in there. And then when he went in, he was also saying, "Please don't tell anybody I've gone in here. I
mhm,
can't bear to think that people know that I'm in here."
mhm.
Anyway, he's been in for a week, and he's actually met a community. I was
Yeah.
texting with him yesterday, and he said, the nurses are actually really lovely, and there's a posse of people in here, and he said they're everyone. There's lawyers and doctors and
Right.
laborers and all sorts of folk that are struggling the same as him, and they're all in there together. And it's just that, even him having a sense of, because he lives on a farm, he lives isolated, and
Mm,
even him having a sense of, I'm not alone. It's not just me,
yeah.
has been already therapeutic for him. So there's really something around that connection and communication and community of people who understand what you're going through, who get what you're going through. And like you said, with all the service people that have been through terrible trauma, having each other,
Mhm,
is so vital. And I think I've heard from other vets as well that when you finish your service and you go home and you're surrounded by people who don't understand what you've been
mm,
through, that it can be so terribly lonely. And so then the importance of continuing some sort of communities with other ex-service people, so that you can still be surrounded by people who get it, I
yeah.
think is must be really important.
Yeah, it's so incredibly important, and I've experienced it myself, being a woman veteran, and then when I meet other women veterans and we start talking, we start sharing stories and experiences, and it's like, "You too?
Yeah.
Goodness."
Yeah. Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
alone in this, it's
Yeah.
it's you don't want to think of other people suffering, while at the same time, it opens the door to another connection that
Mm.
you may just desperately need, that connection
Mm.
with someone to be able to just get through the next day, the next week,
Mm.
however long it takes, so what kind of advice, or I guess what were some of the findings, as you were writing your book that would lead to some advice to young men and who are still hesitant about communicating with others, or the idea of being vulnerable and opening yourself up to paying attention to your emotions, and then, oh, God forbid, sharing your emotions with other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. A couple of things come to mind. I've been sitting in a men's circle,
Mm,
which is quite literally a group of us men who sit around a fire once a month. And we sit around the fire. There's no alcohol. There's just water. Sitting around a fire with a bottle of water and talking. And
mhm,
we take in turns. We go around the circle. We might pick a theme, so there might be a theme to talk about that month. And you just literally go around, and each man has the opportunity to talk about what they feel or think about that theme, and the other men just listen. It's
mm,
that simple.
yeah,
And you could do this in your community if you're in a community with a group of friends, and you don't have to, if you can't sit outside around a fire, just sit in someone's lounge room, but
mhm,
just go there with the pure intention of sitting and having the opportunity to share how you feel or what you think, and for the others to listen. That's all it is. It's not a therapy session. You're not trying to solve each other's problems. You're not trying to offer each other advice. You're simply listening. And
mm,
it's quite a powerful thing to do. And it's free. It doesn't cost anything. You could just need to get a group of mates and say, "Hey, do you want to try this men's circle?" And we'll just sit around and talk. So that's something that comes to mind. Another practice that you could start, a solo practice, is just making some time to sit in contemplation and self-exploration. So if you have a family, if you have, a partner and children, let them know what you're doing. Just
Mm,
say, "Hey, on Sunday afternoon, I'm just gonna go and sit in the backyard. I'm just gonna go and sit under that tree just for 15 minutes or half an hour, and I'm just gonna sit with myself and do a bit of self-exploration. Just get curious around how I'm feeling today."
mhm,
That's it. That's all I'm going to do. If you're single and you don't have a family, you just go and dedicate some time and say, "I'm just gonna go and sit for 15 minutes and sit there quietly and just contemplate your internal world. How are you feeling?" You
mhm.
know, and then start to language that. So
Yeah,
I'm feeling calm, or I'm feeling a bit agitated, or I'm feeling stressed, or I'm
mm,
feeling tired, or I'm just start to put some words to it. Whatever words come to you, that's the first step. And then the second step is start to share how you're feeling with someone who cares.
mm,
So if it's your partner or your best friend, say, "Hey, I want to get better at communicating how I feel.
mhm.
So I'm going to start practicing it. And I might be a bit clumsy to begin with. I might not be very good at it to begin with. But can I ask that you just lend me your ear
Yeah,
occasionally and just listen while I try and communicate how I'm feeling?" And
yeah,
of course, the person who loves you will say, "Of course,"
yeah.
you know. And then you just sit there and kind of bumble your way through it. So I'm feeling a bit agitated, I think. I think perhaps maybe I'm feeling stressed. And I think I'm feeling stressed about ABC, whatever that is. So this is starting to communicate your emotions. And when you as you practice this, if you made a weekly practice and said to your wife and kids, "Hey, every Sunday I'm going to go and sit under the tree,
Yeah,
right, and spend some time," they will support that. And
yeah.
also the other benefits of that is that your children are learning by from example. They're watching you spend time contemplating and practicing self-awareness. They're going to mirror that. They're going to be like, "Oh, wow, that's a good thing to do." Yeah.
Mhm.
So you're teaching your children, the next generation, how to be more contemplative and communicative, in terms of your emotions. So yeah, there's a couple of tips.
Oh, I love that, and I especially appreciate you verbalizing it's okay to stumble your way through it.
Yeah.
Communication, I always say it's a skill just like any other skill, you gotta work at it to get good at it, and so you have to give yourself permission. Be human, it's not going to start off with everything being 100% accurate. It might feel weird at first. You might use the wrong word, occasionally
Yeah.
whatever it is, it's okay as long just continue to try it out, continue to work at
Yeah.
it, and you'll get more
Yeah.
comfortable, you'll get more confident in your
Yeah.
ability to communicate about those feelings and what you're thinking about and how your emotions are influencing your ability to connect or communicate with others, whatever that it is that's bothering you. Don't give up the first time it doesn't go well because trust me, it's not going to go well at some point. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how communication
Completely.
is.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
just how
Yeah.
life is, in
Be
general.
gentle. Be
Mhm.
gentle on yourself.
Yeah.
Be gentle on yourself. Just and it's the actual act of practicing communication that's the important thing, not how eloquent you are. It's that you're
Yes.
actually trying to communicate. That's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did wanna say just one more thing very quickly because you had mentioned the fire circle and how, this isn't intended to be therapy or, replace therapy or anything. I think there absolutely is a place for therapy for many people, and so having these additional mechanisms in place like the fire circle so that you have people that you can just blow off some steam. This is what's going on with me today. I just need you to listen
Mm,
to me. That's so
mm,
important. And then the ability to just have that alone time to reflect and get your thoughts together and practice communicating your feelings. That's important. And I think a third part of that is therapy, and I think it's
yeah.
important to be comfortable with understanding that therapy I think everybody could use some therapy.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
stigma behind, I think I need to go talk to a therapist. I think it's much better today than what it was even 5, 10 years ago, but we still
Mm,
have a ways to go, and my hope for men is to be able to, get past that stigma and to recognize that the strongest thing you could probably do, the most courageous thing you could probably do would be to be honest in your desire for I need help and I need
yeah,
professional help. I need to speak to a
yeah,
therapist, someone who's going to help me work my way, process
yeah,
my way through what I'm going through.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And also, if you are someone who you might be fine, but if you have a friend and you ask them how they are and they go, "Yeah, I'm fine," and you feel like maybe they're not,
Mhm.
dig a little bit deeper. Go,
Yeah.
"Hey, are you really okay? Like, I'm here."
Yeah.
And suggest therapy for them. Say,
Mhm.
"Hey, I know a good therapist. Like, do you wanna try them out?"
Yeah.
Rather than just letting them kind of brush it under the carpet and go, "No, no, no, I'm fine, I'm fine." If you feel like they're maybe struggling, there's a really lovely question to ask. Rather than just asking, "Hi, how are you?" You could
Mhm.
ask, "Hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being really terrible and 10 being couldn't be better, where how are you today? Give yourself a score out
Mm.
of 10." It's a great
Mm.
question because it makes them actually think about it and be a bit real. And if they go, "Well, I reckon I'm a 6," you might
Mhm.
go, "Oh, wow, I'm curious. Where's the 4 points difference between a 6 and you being, at your peak, at your best? What's going on for you?" Because
Oh,
it creates a more real conversation, and they have to actually answer you then and go, "Well, I'm actually fighting with my wife, and we've been fighting for a while now, and I don't know what to do about it, and I've got no one to talk with about it." It's like, "Oh, wow, now we can have a real conversation."
yeah. That's a fantastic prompt because I can tell you there are so many people who would not even know how to begin that. I'm fine," but they're really not fine, but they
Mm.
wouldn't even know how to say, "I'm not fine," or
Yeah.
explain
So
what's
ask
going
for a
on.
score out of 10.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to start that conversation. Thank you for suggesting that. I know someone is gonna hear this, and that's gonna be so incredibly helpful for them, and that's the whole reason why I love having these conversations. So, if there's anyone out there who is interested in getting your book or contacting you, wanting to learn more about you and see your TEDx talk, all of those things, where are you? What's your social media, your website, all of those things?
Everywhere is Jem Fuller with a J, JEMFULLER.com is the website. Jem Fuller is the handle on all the socials. You can find me. I'm really accessible. If you want to start a conversation, reach out to me. And especially if you reach out through the website, that will come to me and we can start talking. The book now at the moment, Mango Publishing in the States, we had to take down the first edition, take it off Amazon and Booktopia and all the places. So you can't get that anymore. But I think pre-sales for the second edition are happening. I think if you can't find the book, contact me through my website and I'll get you one. I'll make sure you get one for sure.
Okay, that's fantastic. I'll be sure to put your URL in the show notes as well to make it easy.
Awesome.
Just
Thanks, Jen.
click and go. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, Jem, it has been an absolute privilege to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for writing this book. I don't think we talk about men's mental health and how important it is to communicate, learn those communication skills for men, and how just linked those two topics are mental health and your ability to communicate how you're thinking and what you're feeling and all of those things. So I truly appreciate you taking the time. I know it's early for you in Australia to have this
Yeah.
conversation, but it's been such a blessing to have you on the show and I hope to we're able to do this again sometime in the future.
Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be great. Thanks, Jen.
All right, thank you. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Be sure to check out Jem's website, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. You take care now. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Communication 24/7 podcast. We truly appreciate your support and love hearing from our listeners. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share it on your social media platforms. Your shares help us reach more people and continue to bring you great content. And don't forget to follow us on all the social media platforms: X, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and now TikTok for the latest updates and more tips on effective communication. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep communicating effectively.